our weekly Sunday dinner, my daughter squeezed my hand and whispered, "Mommy, when can I stop taking the love candy?" I smiled down at her. "What candy, sweetheart? You know we don't do candy before bed." Beside me, my husband Brandon shifted in his chair while my best friend Ophelia suddenly found her wine glass extremely fascinating. "The pink ones from Daddy's drawer. Auntie Ophelia gives them to me after school when you're not home." "I don't understand," I said slowly, my smile fading. "It's our secret," Gigi whispered. "Daddy says if I tell you, I won't get pretty enough for the pageants. But they make my tummy hurt so bad, Mommy." Ophelia's knuckles went white around her purse. "She's just confused about her vitamins." "What is she talking about, Brandon?" My voice cut across the dining room. "They're just supplements. For energy." "Then why is it a secret?" Everything began clicking into place. The unexplained stomach pain. The heart palpitations no doctor could account for. The weight loss that had everyone complimenting how healthy she looked while she could barely keep a meal down. "Show me these vitamins. Now. They're completely safe." Ophelia started. "Show me." Brandon reached for his phone, but I grabbed Ophelia's purse instead and upended it. Credit card statements scattered across the floor. Charges to overseas pharmacies. "You've been drugging our child," I breathed. The CPS visits. The neighbors calling child services 3 times because she kept collapsing at the bus stop. Brandon's face drained of color. "That wasn't supposed to." "I lost my nursing license," I continued, tears stinging my eyes. 10 years of night school while pregnant, fighting my way to head nurse at Children's Hospital. Gone. Because I couldn't explain why my daughter's blood work showed metabolic damage. I laughed bitterly. "We had to sell my mother's house, the one she left us, to pay for a cardiac specialist for a 7-year-old. Our son won't even eat at the table with us anymore." I choked. Oliver told his teacher he's scared he'll get sick like Gigi. He hides food in his room because he watched his sister collapse at dinner. He's 5 years old and he hoards food. Gigi swayed in her chair, her lips edged with blue. "I'm sorry, Mommy. Daddy said when I'm skinny like Sydney's daughter, he won't want to move away." The room went silent. "What did you just say, baby?" Auntie Ophelia promised. She sobbed, gripping the table for balance. She said when I'm tiny enough, Daddy will love us and won't leave for Sydney's family. Sydney. Everything came together. "Your CrossFit trainer? The one with the daughters who model?" Brandon's phone buzzed. He lunged for it, but I got there first. A text from Ophelia sent 30 seconds ago. She knows. "Don't let her stop now. Dr. Kumar says 10 more pounds and she'll be pageant ready." I scrolled up frantically. "Increased the dose this week. She's down to 52 pounds. Brandon, she looks incredible. Sydney will be so jealous." My hands trembled. You're coordinating this? Together?" Ophelia stepped forward. "You don't understand the pressure he's under. Sydney's husband got him the promotion opportunity in Miami. If Gigi wins Little Miss Florida, we'd have a reason to." "We?" I looked between them. "We?" Suddenly Gigi's eyes rolled back. She collapsed, her tiny body convulsing violently on the dining room floor. "Gigi!" I screamed, dropping beside her. Blood-tinged foam spilled from her mouth as the seizure took hold. "Stay with Mommy, baby. Stay with me." The kitchen door slammed open. Oliver stood there in his pajamas. "Is Gigi dying again?" His voice was flat, empty. My 5-year-old had witnessed this enough times that it had become routine. "Call 911. I screamed at Brandon, who stood frozen. "Call them right now." I rolled Gigi onto her side, timing the seizure the way I'd trained myself to do. The blood was darkening, turning brownish. "I'm calling the police." I reached for my phone, but Ophelia grabbed my wrist. "No, you can't. Look at her. She's finally thin. She's perfect. Just like Sydney's girls." Brandon caught me from behind, arms locking around me. "I'm sorry," he sobbed against my neck. "I'm so sorry, but it's what's best. For all of us. You'll thank me when we're in Miami." With strength that came entirely from rage, I wrenched free and dove for my phone, but Ophelia was already dialing. 911? Please help. My friend has been giving her daughter illegal diet pills. The child is seizing. I ripped my phone from my pocket while keeping one hand on Gigi's shaking body, shouting over Ophelia into my own phone as I dialed. "No, that's a lie." The 911 operator answered, and I shouted the truth while Gigi's small frame jerked against the hardwood. "My daughter has been poisoned with diet pills by her father and his girlfriend. I have text messages proving it. She's having a seizure. We need help now." The operator's voice came through steady, asking for our address while I heard keyboard clicks in the background. Brandon stood frozen against the wall, face white as paper, while Ophelia kept talking into her phone about me being unstable. I put my phone on speaker so the operator could hear everything while I held Gigi's head to protect it from the floor, blood mixed with saliva running down her chin. "EMS and police are 3 minutes out," the operator said. I counted the seizure hitting 2 minutes, then 3, her lips going darker while Oliver watched from the doorway with those hollow eyes that tore something open in me. The sirens grew louder, then the front door burst open, 2 paramedics rushing in with their equipment. The first, a young man with controlled hands, dropped down beside us and started checking Gigi's vitals while his partner, an older woman, readied the oxygen mask. "How long has she been seizing?" I told them 4 minutes now while holding up Brandon's phone with the pill texts visible. "I'm a nurse. My license is suspended, but I know what I'm looking at. She's been given stimulants, probably combined with thyroid medication." The female paramedic nodded, relaying information to the hospital while they got an IV running in Gigi's tiny arm. A patrol officer walked through the door just as they were moving Gigi to the stretcher, his hand on his radio as he assessed the room. "I need statements from everyone," he said, but the male paramedic cut him off. "The child comes first. Everything else gets sorted at the hospital." Brandon started following the stretcher, but the officer stepped in front of him. "Sir, you need to stay here." Brandon tried his supplement story, but I shoved my phone at the officer, showing him screenshot after screenshot. "These are texts between my husband and her," I pointed at Ophelia. "Planning to drug my daughter for pageants." The officer's expression shifted as he read. Then he called for backup and a detective. I climbed into the ambulance with Gigi while Oliver ran after me, and I pulled him up too because I wasn't leaving him alone with Brandon. The ride to Children's Hospital was both endless and instantaneous. The paramedics working on Gigi while she finally stopped seizing but stayed unconscious. We pushed through the emergency department doors and I recognized faces I knew from my years working there. The triage nurse Marie's eyes going wide when she saw me. "We need a full tox screen with chain of custody documentation." I told her as they wheeled Gigi into the trauma bay. This is evidence in a criminal case. We need forensic-level preservation of every sample. Marie flagged the charge nurse while the ED physician, a tall woman I didn't recognize, began examining Gigi. Oliver pressed tight against my side as we watched them work, drawing blood and running fluids while Gigi's heart monitor showed an irregular pattern. The physician pulled me aside after 20 minutes, her expression serious. I have to notify CPS about suspected child endangerment. It's mandatory. My stomach dropped, knowing CPS had already investigated me 3 times when neighbors kept calling about Gigi's collapses, but I nodded because now the truth would finally be visible. They already have 3 reports blaming me, I told her, but those came before we knew she was being poisoned. The social worker arrived within the hour, a young man with patient eyes who took notes while I explained everything. They moved Gigi up to the pediatric ICU for monitoring, and Oliver and I followed, settling into the family lounge with its hard chairs and flickering overhead light. Night came and Oliver curled against me, his small voice breaking the quiet. Is Gigi going to die this time? I pulled him close and promised she wouldn't, even as my voice broke, watching the monitors through the glass door while nurses checked on her every few minutes. The ED physician came back around midnight with preliminary results, finding me in the hallway. We're seeing elevated levels consistent with stimulant and thyroid hormone exposure, she said. I'm ordering specialized panels to identify the exact substances. Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly buckled. Medical proof. Finally, after months of being blamed for Gigi's deterioration, morning arrived slowly, and I hadn't closed my eyes. Oliver drooling against my shoulder when a man in a gray suit walked in. I'm Detective Desmond Grimes, he said, extending his hand. I need to see everything you have. I showed him the complete text exchange between Brandon and Ophelia, scrolling through months of messages about doses and weights and a doctor, Kumar, who had apparently been involved. Then I pulled up the credit card statements I'd recovered, dozens of charges to overseas pharmacies that Brandon had hidden from me. Grimes photographed everything, then sat down with his notebook. Here's how this works, he said. The texts are solid evidence, but we need the actual pills for charges to hold up. He explained search warrants and case building, telling me to document everything going forward, every symptom, every conversation, every medical record. We can get them on child endangerment for certain, and possibly more depending on what we find. Just after lunch, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a weathered briefcase arrived. I'm Melinda Haynes from CPS, she said, sitting carefully like she was trying not to startle us. She pulled out the 3 previous reports where neighbors had called about Gigi, reading through them with different eyes. The system thought you were starving her, she said slowly. But looking at this pattern alongside what we know now, she was being poisoned the entire time. Oliver refused to release my hand throughout the entire interview, pressed against me while Melinda asked gentle questions about what he'd seen at home. He told her about Gigi falling down at dinner, about Daddy giving her special candy, about keeping food in his room because he was scared of getting sick too. Melinda took notes, her face growing heavier with each detail, promising Oliver she would do everything she could to keep him and Gigi safe. That night after Melinda left, I sat in the empty hospital corridor with my laptop balanced on my knees, harsh fluorescent light making my eyes ache as I started typing everything I could recall. Every symptom Gigi had ever had, every doctor visit where her racing heart defied explanation, every time she couldn't hold down her dinner, every collapse at school that got attributed to me not feeding her properly. My fingers moved fast, my nursing training taking over as I organized it into a timeline showing the full pattern. The more I wrote, the more the rage built, because it was all there. Months of my daughter's suffering while I absorbed the blame. I opened our online banking next, scrolling through transactions I'd never noticed before. There they were. Dozens of charges to sites called things like Pharma Direct and Overseas RX, on a card in Ophelia's name with payments drawn from our joint checking. Some were $200, some $500, going back nearly a year. Seeing the betrayal laid out in transaction records felt worse than anything. Every charge proved Brandon had been scheming through this while I worked night shifts, paying for Gigi's medical care. I screenshotted everything and saved it across 3 different cloud accounts because I wasn't risking this evidence disappearing. Around 2 in the morning, I went down to the lab where my former colleague Sarah was covering the night shift. She recognized me immediately, her face softening as I explained the criminal investigation and the need for forensic sample preservation. Sarah promised to handle it personally, labeling everything with proper chain of custody documentation and locking it in the forensic freezer. Having someone who understood the medical side in my corner meant more than I could express. The next afternoon, Brandon showed up at the PICU trying to charm the nurses into letting him see Gigi, telling them I was having a breakdown and fabricating everything. The charge nurse called security when he refused to leave, and I presented the emergency protective order paperwork I was already preparing to file. Brandon turned red when security walked him out, shouting that I couldn't prevent him from seeing his own daughter, but they made clear he wasn't getting near Gigi without a court order. Detective Grimes called that evening, his voice measured as he explained I needed to file for an emergency protective order immediately, to create a legal barrier between Brandon, Ophelia, and the kids. He emailed me the forms and walked me through each section by phone, making sure I understood what to write and which evidence to attach. The next morning I drove to the courthouse with Oliver sleeping in his car seat, hands steady as I worked through every page of the protective order request. I wrote out exactly what they had done to Gigi, attached the text screenshots and bank statements, and included the preliminary toxicology report. The clerk looked at the medical records and expedited the processing, scheduling the hearing for the following morning. That afternoon I met with Sinead Paget, Oliver's school counselor, in a small conference room while a nurse sat with Gigi at the hospital. Sinead pulled out a thick folder she'd been building for months, full of notes about shifts in Oliver's behavior, his food hoarding, his accounts of Gigi's collapses at home. She had everything documented: dates, times, direct quotes from Oliver about being scared to eat dinner. This independent record from someone outside our family would matter enormously for our case. 3 days later, my phone rang from Ophelia's number and I nearly let it go. But then I remembered we lived in a one-party consent state for recording. I hit record and answered, listening to her crying about how sorry she was, how she never meant for any of this to happen. I kept my voice level, asking her specific questions about the pills, and she started admitting she'd been giving them to Gigi after school for months. She said Brandon convinced her they were safe, that the pills weren't supposed to cause this much harm, that she only wanted to help ease his stress about the Miami opportunity. I let her talk for 20 minutes, capturing everything on tape while I made notes about each admission. Detective Grimes called the next morning to say he'd secured search warrants for both Brandon's nightstand and Ophelia's apartment based on all the evidence we'd assembled. They planned to execute both warrants simultaneously that afternoon, so neither could alert the other or destroy anything. Later that day, I sat with Detective Grimes in a small room at the precinct going through our credit card statements line by line. A clear pattern emerged. Brandon ordered more pills every time Gigi began recovering and putting weight back on. The charges lined up perfectly with her worst episodes, like clockwork. Every hospitalization had a large pharmacy charge 2 weeks before. The detective photographed everything, building his case file while I watched my marriage dissolve and purchase records. Melinda called me the next morning while I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria trying to get through some toast, her voice urgent as she explained we needed to file for emergency custody without delay. She met me at the courthouse that afternoon with forms already partially completed, walking me through each section while Oliver colored quietly beside us. The family court clerk looked at Melinda's attached medical reports and expedited everything, scheduling us for the following week instead of the typical month-long wait. Melinda warned me that family court operated differently from criminal court. The judge would focus on what was best for the children over proving guilt, and she helped me organize evidence into clear categories demonstrating I could keep them safe. She explained Oliver would almost certainly stay with me, but the judge might order supervised visits for Brandon until the criminal case resolved, which turned my stomach, but I understood the legal reality. Back at the hospital that evening, Dr. Fraser pulled me into a quiet room with Gigi's latest lab results spread across the table. The toxicology report showed levels of phentermine and synthetic thyroid hormones that made her shake her head slowly as she explained how these substances had been gradually damaging Gigi's developing heart muscle over months. She pointed to specific numbers on the cardiac enzyme tests, showing ongoing damage requiring years of monitoring, possibly lifelong medication. I took notes on everything, my nursing knowledge helping me understand the terminology while simultaneously making it worse because I grasped exactly how serious this was. The next morning I met with Cormac Davenport in his small downtown office, bringing copies of all the new evidence proving I'd been telling the truth about Gigi's symptoms all along. He reviewed my nursing board suspension paperwork alongside the toxicology reports, nodding as he saw how the timeline aligned perfectly, how every symptom I'd reported was now explained by the poisoning. He believed we had an excellent case for reinstatement since the suspension had been based on suspicions that were entirely false, and he started drafting the appeal right there while I watched. Later that same day, Sinead called me to Oliver's school, handing me the thick folder she'd been maintaining for months without telling anyone. Inside were dated notes about every time Oliver mentioned Gigi being sick, every afternoon she'd fainted at pickup, every absence, every worried comment from teachers who'd noticed something was wrong but couldn't name it. She had documented Oliver telling her about watching Gigi vomit after taking Daddy's special vitamins, about being too scared to eat dinner, about hiding crackers under his mattress in case he got sick too. This record from a mandatory reporter who had been observing our family's deterioration would matter enormously for both the custody case and clearing my name. That night while I helped Oliver brush his teeth, my phone started lighting up with friends sending me screenshots of Brandon's Facebook posts. He'd written a lengthy account claiming I had Munchausen syndrome, that I'd been making Gigi sick for attention, that he was simply trying to protect his daughter from her mentally ill mother. I captured everything before he could delete it, remembering Detective Grimes telling me to document everything but not respond, let Brandon keep talking and bury himself further. The next day, Detective Grimes called to say he'd interviewed Sydney at her home, and while she claimed no knowledge of the pills, her account kept shifting. First, she barely knew Brandon. Then she admitted he came to her gym 5 days a week. Then she acknowledged he was desperate for the Miami move and the promotion her husband had dangled. She let slip that Brandon had promised to bring his pageant-ready daughter to Miami, that her husband's company preferred executives with picture-perfect families, and suddenly the whole scheme made even more sense. Meanwhile, Melinda spent hours going back through the old CPS reports with a fresh perspective, marking every place where Brandon or Ophelia had redirected blame toward me. Every time they'd presented themselves as helpful and concerned while subtly pointing at my instability, creating a pattern of suspicion that nearly destroyed everything. She showed me how they'd manipulated every interview, positioning themselves as the worried parties while pointing fingers at me. She typed up an official addendum removing all concerns about my parenting from the file, stating clearly that I had been a victim of false accusations while trying to protect my daughter from medical abuse. 2 days later, Detective Grimes called with the news that Ophelia had broken during questioning and admitted everything. She'd been giving Gigi pills after school for 6 months, crushing them into juice or yogurt, increasing the dose whenever Brandon texted that Gigi was gaining weight. She claimed Brandon had manipulated her, that she believed the pills were safe supplements initially, but admitted she continued even after watching how ill Gigi was becoming. She agreed to testify against Brandon in exchange for reduced charges, and she provided emails and texts spanning over a year showing the entire plan. The hospital responded by implementing strict security measures around Gigi, placing her on a restricted visitor list with only me and my parents permitted without prior approval. They began a careful refeeding protocol since her body had been malnourished for so long, measuring every ounce and monitoring her weight gain closely to guard against refeeding syndrome. Each small meal she managed to keep down felt like a victory as I watched her color slowly returning. Sinead helped me build a detailed safety plan for Oliver, teaching him a code word he could use if he ever felt unsafe, showing him how the new lock on the medicine cabinet worked, establishing predictable mealtimes so he'd know food would always be there. We practiced scenarios where he could tell a trusted adult if something scared him, giving him back some control after months of helplessness. And I watched his shoulders drop just slightly each time we worked through the routine. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table facing a stack of hospital bills that made me feel physically ill. The hospital's financial counselor walked me through their charity care program while Oliver colored beside me. She helped me complete every line, showing me where to note Brandon's abandonment and the criminal case. The program covered 60% of Gigi's ICU stay, but I still had to arrange payment plans for the remainder. $20 here, $50 there, whatever I could manage monthly. At least now the cause of all this debt was known, and I could begin rebuilding without Brandon draining our accounts for pills. Later that afternoon, while Oliver napped, I remembered our doorbell camera and logged into the app. My hands shook, scrolling back through weeks of footage. There she was, Ophelia walking up our front steps at 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday when I worked late, then Thursday at 3:20. Every single day, I had afternoon shifts, arriving right as the school bus dropped Gigi off. I downloaded every clip, watching her carry her large bag inside and leave 20 minutes later. The timestamps matched precisely with when Gigi said she received her candy from Auntie. I emailed everything to Detective Grimes, who called back within 10 minutes saying this was exactly the evidence they'd needed for the warrant. 2 days later, Detective Grimes called to say they'd executed the warrant on our house while Brandon was at work. They found a prescription bottle hidden behind his dress shoes in the back of his closet drawer, exactly where Gigi said Daddy kept the pink pills. The crime lab results made my blood go cold. The pills were a combination of banned diet drugs from Mexico and thyroid medication that accelerates metabolism. No wonder Gigi's heart kept racing and she couldn't hold down food. Detective Grimes said this physical evidence combined with the doorbell footage gave them everything needed for criminal charges. The emergency custody hearing happened 3 days later in family court downtown. I wore my only good dress and brought copies of everything: police reports, lab results, doorbell footage, timestamps, all organized in a binder Cormac helped me prepare. The judge read through the evidence while Brandon sat at the opposite table with his lawyer, looking pale. She asked him one question about the pills found in his drawer, and he started crying, saying he never meant for things to go this far. The judge stopped him and granted me immediate sole custody with a protective order requiring Brandon to stay away from us. He could only see the children at a supervised visitation center once the criminal case concluded. Oliver gripped my hand so hard walking out of the courthouse that his fingernails left marks in my palm. A week later, the PICU doctor finally said the words I'd been praying for. Gigi was stable enough to come off the ventilator. I stood beside her bed holding her hand as they removed the tube, watching her take her first real breath on her own in 7 days. She was so weak she could barely open her eyes, but she squeezed my fingers when I told her she was doing beautifully. The feeding team arrived that afternoon to teach me about refeeding syndrome and how to support her recovery at home. They showed me how to measure small amounts of formula every few hours and track what she managed to keep down, watching for signs her body couldn't process nutrition after such prolonged deprivation. When Gigi finally woke up enough to speak, her voice scratchy and thin, she asked whether Daddy would come see her. I had to explain that Daddy was in a kind of timeout for giving her medicine that made her sick, using language a 7-year-old could hold while my heart broke in half. The story leaked to local news channels and my phone started ringing nonstop with journalists wanting comments. One reporter even tried to access Gigi's room and had to be stopped at security. Cormac told me to document everything but speak to no one. Protecting my children's privacy came before telling my side publicly. I captured every message and voicemail, keeping records in case we needed media restraining orders too. The nursing board called to schedule an informal conference now that new evidence had surfaced. I spent 3 full days at Cormac's office preparing my evidence packet, organizing medical records, police reports, and witness statements showing I'd been trying to help my daughter, while others were systematically poisoning her. Cormac coached me on presentation, how to lay out the timeline clearly, reminding me this was my opportunity to reclaim my career. Then Detective Grimes called with news that surprised me, though it probably shouldn't have. Ophelia's attorney had contacted him offering a deal: full testimony against Brandon in exchange for reduced charges. She produced emails going back 14 months, showing Brandon orchestrating the entire scheme, researching which pills to use, calculating dosages, even researching pageant schedules in Miami for after they relocated. The betrayal went so much deeper than those final 6 months of pills. She had screenshots of Brandon describing Sydney's daughters to her and explaining that Gigi needed to be thin enough to compete with them for his image at the new position. Detective Grimes asked whether I'd be willing to make a recorded call to Brandon to get him talking. I sat in the police station with recording equipment while Detective Grimes prepared me for the conversation. When Brandon answered, he immediately began crying and begging me to drop everything, saying we could repair the family. I stayed even and asked him directly why he'd given our daughter those pills. He said he just wanted us to have a better future in Miami, that Sydney's husband wouldn't offer the promotion unless his daughter was pageant ready, that he did it all for our family. I asked him plainly whether he knew the pills would hurt her, and he said he thought she'd be fine, that other girls used them all the time, that I was catastrophizing as usual. Detective Grimes gave me a thumbs up as Brandon kept talking, dismantling his own position with every word, still believing he could talk me back to his side. The next day we met with the pediatric cardiologist who pulled up Gigi's heart scans and pointed to areas showing damage from the stimulants, explaining she'd likely have rhythm problems for years. She'd need EKGs every 3 months, possible medication if the irregular beats worsened, no contact sports that might stress her heart. I took notes in my old nursing notebook, grateful I understood the medical language, even though each detail landed like another blow. He printed a thick packet about managing pediatric arrhythmia, and walked me through warning signs, when to call 911, how to check her pulse. This wasn't resolving quickly, but at least we finally understood what we were dealing with instead of being blamed for symptoms without a cause. The following week, Sinead arranged Oliver's first therapy session at the school, explaining she'd use play-based approaches to help him work through what he'd witnessed. I walked him to her office that first Thursday morning and watched him grip his backpack straps until his knuckles went pale. She had toys and art supplies across a low table and let him choose what to do while I waited outside. Through the door, I heard her asking him to draw his family, and when she showed me the picture later, it showed just me, him, and Gigi, no Daddy anywhere on the page. She said this was a normal response and would take time, but at least he was beginning to express what he felt instead of keeping it compressed inside. 3 days later, my phone rang from an unknown number. And when I answered, Brandon's voice turned my stomach. He was calling from a burner phone despite the protective order explicitly prohibiting all contact. His words came out rapid and threatening. If I didn't drop the charges, he'd find a way to take the kids. That no judge would leave children with someone whose nursing license was suspended. I grabbed my second phone to record while keeping him on the line, letting him keep going. He said he knew people who could complicate things for me, that I'd never practice nursing again if I kept pushing. The second he hung up, I called Detective Grimes and played him the recording. He came to take my statement that afternoon and said this violation would damage Brandon significantly in court since it demonstrated his inability to follow the most basic boundaries. 2 weeks passed before the district attorney's office called to say formal charges were being filed against both Brandon and Ophelia. The prosecutor explained Brandon faced 3 counts of child endangerment plus administering harmful substances to a minor and conspiracy charges that could mean significant prison time. Ophelia was charged as an accomplice with lesser exposure, but still a permanent criminal record. The arraignment was scheduled for the following Monday. I sat in the back row watching Brandon appear before the judge in an orange jumpsuit while his lawyer argued for manageable bail. The judge reviewed the charges and the evidence, including the protective order violation from the burner call. She set bail at $200,000 with strict conditions including GPS monitoring and absolutely no contact with me or the children. Brandon's parents sat in the front row, his mother beginning to cry as she heard what her son had done to Gigi. They posted his bail but couldn't look at him when he walked out. Meanwhile, Cormac filed a motion for reconsideration with the nursing board, attaching all the new evidence showing I'd been blamed for symptoms I was actually trying to treat. The board scheduled a hearing for the following month, and Cormac said they appeared receptive to reversing the suspension now that the real cause of Gigi's illness was documented. He helped me organize everything the criminal charges against Brandon and Ophelia, statements from Gigi's treating physicians. Melinda came by the house for her follow-up assessment, observing how the children were doing with Brandon absent. Oliver ate dinner at the table while she was there, and Gigi showed her the art projects she'd completed during recovery. Melinda wrote in her report that both children were stable and safe in my care, that Oliver was improving with therapy, and Gigi was gaining strength each day. She recommended closing the emergency intervention since the danger had been removed, and noted that the system that had once investigated me was now protecting us from the actual threat. A week later, a letter arrived in my mailbox with Ophelia's return address. My hands shook opening it and reading her plea for forgiveness, claiming she loved Gigi like a daughter, and never intended things to go this way. She wrote that Brandon manipulated her and she believed the pills were safe at first, that she only wanted to help ease his stress. I didn't respond and gave the letter to Detective Grimes as evidence, maintaining the no-contact order because her choices nearly killed my child, and forgiveness wasn't mine to offer on that timeline. The hospital's financial counselor called with news that the charity care program had approved coverage for the majority of Gigi's medical bills from this whole nightmare. I still owed around $15,000, but they arranged a payment plan I could manage by picking up extra shifts. I started working per diem at a walk-in clinic 3 days a week. Not the head nurse position I'd lost, but honest work that helped cover the bills while I waited for my license hearing. Every Thursday evening, I attended a support group at the hospital for parents of children with serious medical conditions. Walking in that first time, I expected judgment. But when I shared our story, other parents recognized something in it. A mother whose ex had given their son unauthorized steroids for athletics. A woman whose mother-in-law had been secretly administering allergy medicine that made her grandchild sick. We weren't isolated in having family members harm our children while insisting they were helping. 6 weeks after the arraignment, the prosecutor called to say the grand jury had returned indictments against both Brandon and Ophelia. She explained this meant sufficient evidence existed for a full trial, though she expected Brandon to pursue a plea deal rather than risk a jury decision. She walked me through how plea bargains worked and what to anticipate in either scenario. Either way, months of process remained, but the legal system was moving forward and taking this seriously. 3 weeks later, I sat in the school conference room with Sinead working through every aspect of Gigi's medical needs for her return to class. The principal took notes as we mapped out bathroom access every 2 hours, snacks at specific intervals to maintain stable blood sugar, and a quiet space where she could rest if her heart started racing. Sinead distributed copies of the 504 plan to each teacher, making sure everyone understood Gigi might need to leave class suddenly if she felt dizzy or unwell. The school nurse showed me where emergency medications would be stored, and we rehearsed the protocol for reaching me if anything happened. Small steps, but everyone felt enormous after everything we'd been through. That same week, Cormac called with news from the nursing board meeting where they'd reviewed all the evidence showing I'd been blamed for symptoms I was genuinely trying to treat. They voted to grant provisional reinstatement with a supervisor reviewing my work for 6 months. Not the full clearance I wanted, but sufficient to begin working again while the criminal case moved forward. Cormac said this represented a significant win given how rarely suspended licenses get reinstated, and that full clearance would likely follow once the trial concluded. I cried when the letter came because it meant I could support my children without relying on anyone else's resources. Melinda came by one final time with paperwork showing CPS was officially transitioning us to voluntary monitoring where I simply check in monthly with updates on the children's progress. She sat at my kitchen table going through her final report, noting how every concern from the previous investigations now made sense in light of the poisoning. The system that once suspected me of harming my daughter now recognized I had been fighting to protect her all along. She said she'd never seen a case reverse this completely in 20 years of this work. 2 days before the trial date, I met Detective Grimes and the prosecutor at the courthouse to rehearse my testimony. They walked me through every question they'd ask and warned me about what Brandon's lawyer might attempt in cross-examination to undermine my credibility. My hands shook holding my water glass, but my voice held steady as I practiced, describing finding those texts, watching Gigi seize, learning the full truth of what they'd done to her. The prosecutor said I'd be a strong witness because I had specific dates and medical documentation for everything. Detective Grimes reminded me to simply tell the truth and let the evidence carry itself. The morning of trial, Brandon's lawyer called mine to say he'd accept a plea on child endangerment with mandatory treatment and supervised visits only at a court-designated facility. He'd receive probation rather than prison, but would be required to complete parenting classes and stay away from us except for those monitored monthly visits. The prosecutor said this was a good outcome because it meant no trial where the children might need to testify, and Brandon's guilt was on the record. I wanted him incarcerated, but keeping him away from us mattered more than punishment. Ophelia accepted her plea the same day, receiving community service and restitution of $30,000 toward medical bills payable over 5 years. The judge made the no-contact order permanent, meaning any approach to us would result in immediate jail time. Watching her in court, unwashed hair and dark circles under her eyes, brought no satisfaction. Just a hollow sadness that someone I'd trusted so completely could harm my child for a man who didn't genuinely love her either. Finally, after 2 months in the hospital, Gigi came home with a thick care binder, cardiology appointments every 2 weeks, nutritional supplements 3 times daily, therapy twice a week. She'd put on 5 pounds and had color in her cheeks again instead of that frightening gray. Oliver helped me arrange her room with new butterfly decorations and a special chart where she could track her real medications, the ones that would actually help her heart recover. He made her a welcome home sign covered in glitter that said best sister ever and taped it to her door. We resumed family dinners 3 evenings a week with Oliver actually sitting at the table instead of retreating to his room with a plate. He still kept crackers in his nightstand, and sometimes I'd catch him watching Gigi eat like he was confirming she wouldn't fall over. But seeing her hold down food and laugh at his stories helped more than any scheduled session. Progress wasn't linear, but we were moving through it together, learning again that meals could be something safe. Cormac confirmed the nursing board had approved me for regular supervised shifts at the clinic, rebuilding my career one day at a time. The income was half what I'd made as head nurse, but consistent enough to pay rent and buy groceries without panic. My supervisor said I was doing well and would likely receive full clearance within 3 months if everything continued. After receiving hostile messages from Brandon's relatives and people who only knew his version, I deleted all my social media accounts to focus on healing rather than defending myself to strangers. Every contact that violated the protective order got documented and forwarded to Detective Grimes, who warned Brandon's family that harassment would bring criminal charges of their own. Peace mattered more than public vindication, and my children needed me present, not fighting battles online. The family court judge looked at Brandon's lawyer while working through the thick file on her desk. 2 months had passed since the plea, and we sat in the wood-paneled courtroom to finalize custody terms. Brandon sat across the aisle in his best suit, hands folded like he was at church. His lawyer kept pushing for mediation, suggesting we could resolve things privately without all these restrictions. I shook my head when my lawyer looked over at me. Some things cannot be mediated away. The judge agreed and signed the order giving Brandon 1 supervised visit per month at the county visitation center. He'd check in with security, stay in the monitored playroom, and leave at the hour mark. No overnights, no taking them to his apartment, no unsupervised contact until they reached adulthood. The bailiff handed me my copy, and I tucked it into the folder with the rest of the court documents. Detective Grimes met me in the courthouse lobby the following week, carrying a box of paperwork and evidence photos. The case was officially closed with both pleas entered. He handed me a card listing victim resources and wrote his personal cell number on the back, said to call if Brandon violated the order or if we needed anything at all. He'd handled dozens of child abuse cases, but called ours among the clearest in terms of evidence. Brandon had no viable option but the plea. Justice wasn't perfect since he avoided prison. But my children were safe. I drove past what used to be my mother's house after leaving the courthouse. The new owners had painted it yellow and replaced the curtains. I sat in my car looking at the kitchen window where she used to stand washing dishes while I did homework at the table. She'd raised me alone after Dad left, working double shifts to keep us fed. The house was gone, now sold to pay specialists who couldn't determine what was wrong with Gigi because the real cause was her own father. But my mother's strength lived on in how I had fought for my children. She would have done exactly the same. That afternoon, Gigi came home from school with a permission slip for art club. She'd been back in class 3 weeks and her teacher said she was thriving. I asked if she might want to try pageants again, since all her dresses and costumes were still in the closet. She shook her head firmly and said she never wanted to wear those clothes again. Art club met Tuesdays and Thursdays, and she could paint anything she wanted. We spent the evening bagging up every pageant dress, every dance shoe, every sparkled tiara and hair ribbon. She helped carry the bags to the donation bin at the church, watching them disappear into the metal container. She was choosing her own direction now. Oliver sat at the dinner table 5 evenings that week, actually eating with us instead of taking a plate to his room. He still kept crackers and juice boxes in his nightstand drawer, and I'd find granola bar wrappers tucked under his bed. His therapist said this was to be expected after what he'd lived through. The food hoarding would ease as his sense of safety deepened. He watched Gigi eat her whole meal without getting sick, saw her keep everything down and ask for more. Small victories were the ones that mattered. After the kids went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table organizing my binder with all our important documents. Court orders in the front pocket, then medical records sorted by date, therapy notes, school documents, emergency contacts all labeled with tabs. The prosecutor's card, Detective Grimes's number, the victim advocate's information. Having everything organized gave me a kind of control when so much had been chaos. Being prepared was how I protected us. 6 months after receiving my provisional license, the nursing board sent the letter making it permanent with no restrictions attached. My supervisor had written a thorough recommendation about my work at the clinic. I'd passed every review, never missed a shift, treated every patient with care. I went to the craft store and bought a simple black frame, hanging the reinstatement letter on the wall beside my original license from 10 years ago. Both together told the whole story, the fall and the getting back up. That night after homework and baths, the house settled into quiet. Gigi read a library book in bed, propped up on pillows surrounded by stuffed animals. Oliver slept through the entire night without waking frightened or checking on his sister. No crisis calls from the school. No court dates on tomorrow's calendar. No medical emergencies to manage. I sat on the couch with a cup of tea, listening to the dishwasher run and the clock on the wall tick steadily. Safety wasn't dramatic or loud, but it was everything we needed. We were finally home. Really home in our small apartment with secondhand furniture and peace.